Agni Zotis here with the Educators Edition and May Kids Transform. And we're having a conversation today with Archdiocesan, and we'll call him Alex. And it's a great pleasure to have him as our guest here and share his experiences as the educator he is. I know him because we both we're part of an not-for-profit that's called EMBCA, and that's another foundation that focuses on culture and education. So it's a great pleasure to dive into his journey as an educator for me and for you. So, welcome, Alex. So nice to have you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy grading papers and writing books. Can you please tell us who you are? Start there.
Sure. Okay, so Agni, it's always good to talk to you. Our ships are going in the same direction. I'm from Hydra in my Greek background, so I always talk about ships, but I'm proud to be sailing in the same direction as you are with EMBCA and on so many other initiatives. We're individuals. We cherish our individuality, but we also know how to collaborate and align. So what about me? So I am my wife, kids and I, and our two dogs who may chime in at some point, especially when the mailman comes by. We live in the town of Clemson, South Carolina, which is where Clemson University is, and it's right on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. So it's hilly. Even though it's in the south, we have we still have seasons of sorts, but when we're not here, and if we're not in Europe, we tend to be on the coast, the Atlantic coast of South Carolina, where we also have a home. My current job, in addition to like so many other Greeks, commercial real estate, is I am teaching as a lecturer at Clemson University. My job is technically in the political science department, although I'm not a political scientist, nor am I a PhD. But most of my classes are in the honors college. And I teach seminars that most of which I design myself. For example, just a few minutes before we got online, I was grading my papers for a seminar called Innovation, Inequality, and Culture, where we really do the critical thinking dance. And there's no right answers. I came to this from a background that started at Georgetown University, where I studied East European studies. I also got a law degree, a business degree, and when we moved down here from Chicago in 2017, I was like, well, I'd like to get my master's in history. So luckily, I found a job that would pay for it. And I started at Clemson in one degree or another since 2018, teaching, studying, and now I'm also working on a PhD in history. So that's kind of how I got here.
Amazing. I love your class. I'm critical thinking. I mean, that's something that seems to be anti the educational system, honestly. If I may say that publicly. Yes,
I love it that you say it publicly. I think part of the problem, and this doesn't happen in my classes, and by the way, in terms of challenges, I have a few on that, because I think that we have silenced so many discussions and debates, and I think that's really antithetical to the educational process. My classes tend to be very much about critical thinking, about respecting differences of opinion, about not ideologizing, For example, I pride myself in that my students, by and large, don't know my own political views, because I don't want my views to color the nature of the class. I mean, there's some guardrails, but these guardrails are wide, and really the guardrails are the limits of civility and respect for each other. I mean, beyond that, there's a lot of space.
How wonderful. And how needed, especially in our country, if not all over the world, but especially in our country that's so polarized.
It is, and the interesting thing is when you create a space where students know they got to be there, they're going to be there for 75 minutes. They're going to be challenged to speak up and challenged to think. It's really an opportunity of how to human, right? How to human, how to look across at your colleague, how to debate, how to disagree, and, you know, get to a better solution. You know, it's kind of a Millsian solution. Let's get the ideas out there. Let's debate them. We may not have an answer. We may not agree, but we learn how to human. We're not hiding behind a screen. We're talking. We're talking, and we see the cues, the visual, the non-visual cues of our comments to our colleagues, right? And when you're behind screens all the time, your ability to communicate weakens, because so much of communication is not verbal, right? So much of communication is understanding the cues. I go to one day a week. I go to the university cafeteria, and I hang out with a bunch of other professors or old guys. And there's this one fellow who was an assistant athletic director, and everyone calls him coach. And he says it's about reading the room, right?
Always,
Students get a chance to read the room.
always, always.
And reading the room is something that our generation knew we had to do. A lot of this generation doesn't get that they still need to read the room. And read the room skills are something that are not going to be digitized. And maybe the difference between you having that job and not having that job, between you making that connection, whatever connection, social, business, political, God forbid, romantic connection, reading the room is very, very important. Instead of letting an algorithm make decisions for you, you know, let your emotions, let your humanity and the humanity of the person across from you make that connection.
Oh, you're just making me think of AI that's upon us, right? I mean, there is no emotion yet established through that. So I can't help to think that this conditioning of the youth of not having critical thinking and only communicating through monologues, um, how will affect them, because that's replaceable.
Yes. Yes. Well, and not only that, if we keep offloading even our monologues, then what do we have left?
No.
You know, I mean, the AI is useful, but it still has to be human centered. And I don't think that if we don't know how to human in the first place, how is it going to be human centered? You know, if you've not been brought up to human, then you're lost. And that's why, even though I'm not very good at sports, I'm grateful my kids are good at it. My wife's good at it, because I think sports is one of those spaces where we've kept technology, it's present, but it's not replacing activity.
Right.
So, thank God for sports. And I encourage my students to to be involved in sports, because it's really where the conditioning of millennia of humanity remains: the practice, the skills, the mental, the physical agility. the social agility, those items are being abdicated because of technologies. At least sports still puts those in the center. So I know that's a little bit of an aside, but
It's not on the side. It's very important what you're saying, because you're bringing it back to the body and the mind and the connectivity. The intellect is connected to the body, and it's fundamental to activate the body, because it actually activates the mind.
correct.
What I'm seeing a lot is, these mental illnesses, which are really not mental illnesses. They're just side effects of modern life. And sports is an important one, because you have collaboration, you have communication. I mean, it goes back to what you're saying and what you're teaching, really, right? And it's fundamental, because we evolved for millions of years through tribes, and all of a sudden we're like isolated.
Yes. Yes.
And that's
And
high price to pay for that.
it is. And one article I'm going to send to you is by this theologian called Neil Postman. He talks about 5 things about technological change. All of my classes start with the Postman article. And one of the things he says is that technological change will always come at a price, and it's usually culture that pays that price. So it's not saying that we shouldn't embrace it, but we should at least be aware of its implications, and put changes into context, and also ask questions. Do we want this to affect us in this way? So many of my seminars, cover that sort of question. How do you keep a sense of culture and history, or how do you manage the change with technological change? We can't be naive to the change. We can't pretend it doesn't happen. It's just like the saying, just because you don't care about politics doesn't mean that politics doesn't take an interest in you. Well, it's the same thing. Even if you don't take an interest in technological change, it's taking an interest in you. So I tell my students, be selfish, be self-aware, be focused on the self. That's not my line. When we lived in Serbia, we would go to this yoga center, and the yogi would say, if you want to practice yoga, you have to be selfish. And he's like, I'm not meaning some sociopath, but I mean, you have to be self-aware,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You have to be self-centered. You have to be self-interested.
Yes. Yes. Know thyself.
No, that's so. Yes. I mean, choose the culture, and, choose the philosopher. And again, here's where we end up having convergences across traditions, right?
It's been around forever. I mean, and I think when I think about technologies, like, it's a wonderful tool. Like right now, we're here. How wonderful we could communicate, and we could learn things and share knowledge. But it's like, are we using technology, or is technology just using us as a number and an algorithm and personal data and so on?
Right.
5 people, a handful of people, to become more rich, while we sit around fighting each other and having these ridiculous concepts. Because and this is what I'm observing, and it's easy to fall into that trap, because everything is pointing that way. By the way, it's like how my thoughts are so for the so righteous. But when there's no communication, real communication, we don't really know what's going on.
Right. Right. And how deep is your, there's a friend of mine said, how deep is your religion if you can't question, if you can't talk about it?
Got to be able to talk about all of it.
Right.
And we stop communicating. It's
Well, Agni, that brings up an interesting point. I find that, we were talking about polarized society. I find that we're very ideologized. In other words, we've got a willingness that I think in the past we didn't have to overlook, problems if they fit a narrative. And most narratives that you and I grew up with, we're used to reading books that are 500 pages, right?
Yeah,
The narratives of today are a 30-second TikTok video.
absolutely.
Okay. So imagine how much is left out when all you've got is 30 seconds to make your point. And then you demand and require an ideological consistency on something you don't even know about.
No,
This is terrifying.
it is.
And it seems to be perpetuated, including, I have to say, and here, I'm particularly problematized by the academy. I think the academy does a lot of that.
Of course.
The academy does a lot of that, and I'm looking at it as someone who is basically an outsider to the academy. And I think that serves you in good stead, but it also means that if the wagons are circled, you're outside the wagons, which is fine. I mean, we Greeks have always been asymmetric. It's been our strength. We haven't used it as well as we might have. And I think it's also why people fear us, because we have an asymmetry, but asymmetry also requires critical thinking. You have to be able to have a realistic analysis of the facts on the ground, and know your own resources and how, with limited resources, can I do things to the greatest effect. But that also means that you have to do the exercise, physical and mental. We're not doing it. And the academy's not doing it.
And the academy is breeding people that have zero critical thinking, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I've seen in the school systems.
Unfortunately, that is the case. And the other thing, and I've seen this in any number of locations. I remember one of the Modern Greek Studies Association meetings, the last one I went to in Toronto. There really is an inability to tackle the way you need to tackle as the academy, and an increasing unwillingness to do it. And
Why is that, you think?
well, look, I don't need to tell you as an artist how difficult balancing art and finance is. Okay. You can write a book about that. Right. I see two things happening. On the one hand, I've always said, unless you own a business, you shouldn't have like a signature. You shouldn't have, I believe in term limits for politicians, including for judges. I don't believe in tenure. All right. You should turn off the recording.
No, not at all. Because of comfort. Comfort really kills.
Right. I believe in limited. Yeah. Yeah. I better watch my back when I get out there. I believe in limited, protection of roles so that you can actually get things done. But I do fear, quite honestly, a situation where, look, I'm tenured. There's no need to innovate. There's no need to be on the cutting edge. So I think that that's one thing. And I also think that, unfortunately, the remuneration of people who are at the broken end of the bottle, right? They're at the front line teaching, is far less than on the administrative side. And, I'm just thinking of my late father, who in 1973, I was 4 years old, ran for state legislature in Utah. And he was saying in his brochure that schools are too fancy, and they're focusing more on administrative and not on delivering teaching. And I mean, the university says, hold my beer, because the universities, they're very top heavy on the administrative side, rather than, focusing on the deliverers, who are delivering value. And, I tell my students, I go, look, I work for you. I work for you. Because I got a lesson from one of my first bosses, because I was in banking for 12 years. I went to a conference instead of a client meeting, pulls me aside and said, who pays you? And I said, well, the company does. He says, your clients pay you. And if you want to have this position, you will learn that the client meetings always take precedent. You got to know who you work for. And a lot of our mutual friends who we know that are, particularly successful both in business and in larger society, have a strong sense of that. That doesn't mean the customer is always right, but it means you know who you work for. And I think that you have two situations. You have a comfort in one part of academia, and then you have too many people who are at the broken end of a bottle, and they don't have the financial ability, to live well. I mean, taking multiple jobs, and by the way, what I'm saying about academia, I mean, for our teachers, it's even more so what they have to go through. When so many teachers are spending money to provide materials for their classes.
It's absurd.
Yes.
It's absurd when we have billions and billions of dollars that funnel into the educational system. It's absurd.
Yes.
And we have a broken system.
We do. And it's funny, because in this class, Innovation, Inequality, and Culture, we talk about some of the whys, that our education's funded usually by local property taxes. So where you live makes a lot of difference. And of course, on the one hand, everybody wants their kids in the right district, and you don't necessarily want your funds to be spent elsewhere. At least let's have a conversation about maybe we can direct things a little more fairly. Part of critical thinking, I think, is also recognizing your own hypocrisies that maybe you can't change or you're not willing to change, but at least come to terms with the fact that, yeah, I pay higher property taxes. My kids go to a better school. I want my taxes to be spent locally, but understand the cumulative effect of that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think even those kids are plagued by, I mean, maybe there's more resources, right?
Mhm.
But I know, like in Long Island, in New York City, for example, there's like massive drug issues and like, yeah,
Well, I think that a lot of that,
it does make sense what you're saying.
I think a lot of that too is because, we're constantly distracted. We're to some degree, and when I taught a class, you'll love the name of this class. Social media is culture. And I didn't come up with the name. A student of mine, he was a guy sitting in the back of the class, good old boy from Charleston. He's like, well, I think social media is culture. So the next year I created this class, and I had a psychology student that compared social media with drugs, and how the hits of the likes are like, a drug hit.
The dopamine, absolutely.
The dopamine hits, and after a while you need a different hit, because and look, we all to a degree have it. I mean, we started our conversation prior with some Facebook some Facebook analogies, and there's another example. Facebook is a great way to communicate. That's how you and I met. That's how many of our mutual friends, we met through that medium, but that medium has also changed us.
Absolutely.
I think that we need to understand the implications of that.
I agree. I agree. And I'm glad your students have you as a teacher, actually, because these are very important conversations to bring forth.
Well, it's interesting to take students that are like STEM students that are highly transactional in the way they look at things, and to say, don't worry about your grade so much as worry about the outcome.
Ooh.
If you leave here without having changed some of your belief system, then I expect you to nail me on the evaluation. If not, I expect you to explain that. When you hear something like, I've never thought this way before,
Yes.
That's important. When you can impart the experience of, I've lived in so many different countries. I speak over half a dozen languages. I've lived the life of a local in so many states and in so many countries. That has value. And being able to suddenly draw on something that happened when I worked in a law firm in Chile and bring it to a class, that's real. Those are the kind of things that make a difference to students. Those are the kind of things that they take from rather than operating off a script, because, authenticity is powerful. People know when you're acting.
The most powerful.
Right. It's the most powerful. My wife calls it the highest level.
It is.
Even higher than love, authenticity.
It is. It's actually like scientifically proven.
Yeah. Authenticity is powerful. And unfortunately, we're lacking that more and more.
Yeah.
And I think that
why do you think that is?
Well, that's a hell of a question. I think to some degree, you and I grew up in a less monetized society. That's item one. So people are always thinking about money, but we also grew up in a society where you weren't always being photographed. You weren't always online. You tended to have to do most things. What's that?
You were never photographed.
Right. I mean, the idea that somebody would take pictures would creep you out, unless it was at a party and, you took a picture, but people just running around taking pictures would creep you out. So that's all changed. So people are always trying to curate. I mean, it's a curation. There is a constant curation rather than living. I had a student who was telling me that, this was an earlier version of smartphones. And she was saying, I was in Paris and I didn't have enough credits on my phone to live stream it. And I said, well, geez, I'm so sorry for you. You had to actually spend time looking and experiencing one of the most beautiful cities in the world rather than worrying about how it looks for people back home. So sorry for you. And everybody started laughing because, think of the experiences you have that there's no pictures about. No pictures.
I'm so grateful for that. I was talking about that the other day. I was like, thank God, like there's no, and the value, right, of actually being present and living it, where now in all ages, including ours,
Absolutely.
are living through the phone, right? It's like the phone, because otherwise somehow it doesn't exist.
That's correct. And I always tell my students, I said, look, just to break it to you, you may think you're cool. You're not as cool as my generation. And I said, and to make you feel better, the generation prior to ours was even cooler. I said, because everything I did never happened. Never happened.
Right.
The only people who know about it are the people who were there.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's meant to stay with the people who are there.
It's about presence.
Yes, right. Presence, intimacy, not intimacy the way the word is used, but intimacy in a broader sense. We've lost that sense of intimacy. We're dying for that intimacy. And then of course we could seek it in ways that seem like that's intimacy and it's not.
Right.
But again, you have to actually know what the difference is. And our generation is the last one that purely knows how it was and now is young enough to experience, for a lot of our, professional careers, how it is now. So people like you and me have a real responsibility to impart this forward. That's why I do this.
I agree. I agree.
That's why I do this.
It's an important one. It's an important one to, yeah. Presence is an important one because you have to live life, and the only way to live life is in the presence. It's the only time it's actually happening. Although time is not linear, we think of it as a linear space, but it's in the now that it is. There's nothing.
Right.
And I think that's where the global anxieties that we see and the mental illness comes, like getting stuck in these past memories or in the future, anticipation of the future, and the anxiety
Right.
causes in the systems, right?
I think you're absolutely right. And I was reading one of the students' final reflection papers that she called the class an oasis, which is nice. That's
a good one, honey.
It's an oasis. It's a space where you're not pressed, but you're required to be present. You're required to take a stand on things, not one way or another, but you're required to have an opinion. And if you don't talk, I will call on you. I mean, it's not like law school's Socratic method. But it's, which I always found to be offensive and punishing. This is more, an invitation and challenging. And I know what it feels like when it's punishing, so I try to make it as challenging and invitational as possible. Don't always work, but you're supposed to make mistakes.
Right.
You're supposed to make mistakes. Right. And I tell my students, I make mistakes all the time. I forget to put an assignment in. I forget to do this. Hey, we're good. Right. I acknowledge it. I love it when my student just like completely stumps me on a question. It's like, good. I don't know the answer. Let's find out.
But that's like such a life. I mean, this is all reflections on actual life, right?
It's how to human.
And so, yeah, so that's how you start in with how to human. I think the fundamental lessons, right? Because and we're somehow trained that life has to be perfect, and I understand this very much because I was part of that camp, in this ideology of being scared to fail, and I'm actually at the point that I love failure because you learn.
Right. Right. And I think that also is, you have to give yourself permission to do that. And you also have to have people who will collaborate with your ability to do that. And I think that's, people are afraid to ask for help to fail. Right.
Well, listen, I mean, you're talking about collaborating to fail. It's like that's actually brings me to a thought of that's the definition of an actual friend.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be like, oh, my best friend, but we could be friends even to strangers or real, right? Because when somebody is pointing out without being malicious and mean, right? But supportive in that space, that's a real friend.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I love it when my students, spend time talking to each other, particularly when you can see that they don't have much in common socially. They're not in the same, they don't operate in the same cliques, but they collaborate. All my students have to do group projects, and I love it when people are extremely different who come together and produce something. So, that's when strangers become friends. But it takes authenticity, and it takes an environment where you're encouraged to make mistakes. You're encouraged to, push the envelope. And that's the only way I do it. And to be honest with you, that's becoming less and less normative and more scrutinized, which means that, this probably has a, I can think of the Greek word, Miaoulis, sell by date,
Right. Right.
This, because to some degree, I represent an old worldview that is going away.
Well, you also represent a truthful and authentic. It's a word that you used a couple of times, and I think that's the value of that. And we are all unique individuals, and what you're talking about is real community building.
Yep.
And community building doesn't have to be like, oh, you're just like me, that's why you're in my tribe. No, not really. We're all different, and we're blessed to live in a world and this country, for example, that does have so many multi-levels of differences. And to bring that together without fear and judgment, wow, what a gift. I think what you're doing is fundamental, actually.
Well, I like it. I don't necessarily think that it's jives with the, with the current state of academia, which is why it's also good to be independent.
Absolutely. Honey, it doesn't jive with the current state of the world. There's nothing in our world that this is like the systems that I see in place are all anti this.
Yes, they are. They are. We're basically fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, but it's important battle, because if actually this is what it's about, and this is the only thing that we have against the machine. Because if we're all like part of the sheep world, then there's no difference between the machine and us. And the only value that we have is our humanity.
But we do, and we also need to have a sense of history. A class that I wanted to teach, but the administration wouldn't let me teach because they said I wasn't qualified, was a class, food and culture, because I'm not a food science major. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about how did, a low country Black person feed her family in spite of poverty, feed, food, nutrition, rituals, celebration of life, celebration, commemoration of death, celebration of family. How do all these cultures find a way to provide nutrition and stories and culture around a table that...
Nourishment, right?
What's that?
Nourishment for body and
Right.
soul and mind.
How does that affect your culture, and how can each and every one of you draw from your own family history to live better, to have greater nutrition? But again, I'm not a food science major, so I don't have a specialty in that, so I couldn't talk about it. But the whole point was to draw on your history. Why, instead of going to Hardee's or Carl's Jr., you should cook something yourself, or draw on. I always have students from New Jersey. I love New Jersey students, right? And a lot of times the New Jersey students are Italian. So I was like, look, your Nona's pasta fagioli, right? She could whip that up You wouldn't necessarily have a lot of expensive ingredients, but she raised 5 kids. Everybody, was healthy. She's 90 years old. She's still a Spitfire. You know, you're in your 20s and you already have, ailments that people, our age would have in their 40s because of how they eat, not only what they're eating, but how they're eating, what's around the table. And one of the most beautiful things that happened is I had 2 students sitting close to each other. One was a good old white Southern boy from the Appalachians. The other one was from, uh, a black young woman from the low country of South Carolina. But we were talking about the dinner table and phones at the dinner table. So the white kid said, "Oh no, sir. When we're at the dinner table, my Mima will not allow any phones at the table." And the black girl said the same thing. She says the table is for family and praising the Lord. That's it. And I said, you see, you're both Southerners for 2 different races, but you have the same relation to the food. And by the way, your foods are the same. So these are people who may look at each other as, polarly opposite. And they're all like, yeah, that's right. That's what food and culture can bring. I had a student from Long Island, half Greek, half Italian, and she talks about the pastizzo wars, pastizzo versus lasagna, which is better? My wife being Serbian, me being Greek, stuffed peppers, how should they be made?
I love
Should they be cooked in the oven? Should they be on the stovetop? But there's a lot of whys to that, right? There's
massive. It's nourishment.
Right. It's nourishment, but there's also an encoded history there,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So, there's so many ways to get there. There's so many conversations to have. Uh, I get a lot of grief because my syllabi tend to be very spare. And I say, I don't know what the culture of this class is going to be. I don't know what the vibe is going to be. I don't know what the aura is going to be. Please let me go in there. Do you always know what you're going to paint when you're at the easel?
I think, no, that's why it's fantastic. That's why it's wonderful. There's a real communication with, the peace, the energy, divinity, it all comes into play. Past, present, processing, it's so multi-leveled.
Correct. Correct.
We have to allow for space for that. I mean, that's what excites me about making art. That possibility of infinity, really.
Yeah, where does this journey go? Right?
It's mysterious, it's challenging, it's curiosity, it's all of it coming together. It's mastering technique.
Well, how many times I've told my students, I said the difference between finding your way without navigation versus with. You don't know if you're not going to find a more beautiful way, if you're not on the way going to stop and I don't know, at a cafe to get coffee, to ask directions. You're going to meet someone in that cafe that could be the love of your life or could give you a great idea. It's the same thing. I had to pick up a book for, my research in the library, and I was at the university library. I got the information, and the young woman's like, "Oh, do you want us to get it for you?" And I said, "Look at me. Do I look like someone who's never found something in a library?" She says, "No, you don't." So on the way there, what happens? I meet one of my old students I hadn't seen. She's a senior. She was my student when she was a freshman. Hey, how are you, Mr. B? It's great to see you. And then on the way, I found a much better book because a lot of these books were together. I was like, I don't need this book. This is the book I want. And I leave.
Absolutely. I think what you're talking about and that ties into this is instinct. And we have incredible instinct, actually. And we're not taught to trust it or cultivate it.
Well, it's the problem with a lot of things we have is if we don't use it, we
We lose on it. It works on everything. But I think instinct is fundamental, and yeah,
you need to hone it. You need to constantly hone your instinct. Just like my daughter needs to hone her forehand or backhand in tennis.
absolutely.
We we all need to be doing this. And this is really what education is. It's not a script book. It is basically an easel, and you've got a general idea, but you don't really know what the painting is going to look like.
I love it.
That's how I do it.
I think it's phenomenal. I love it. I think there's so much, there's so many great seeds in this conversation. Yeah.
Well, that's really what it's about. You know, I'm blessed. First of all, I don't have the intellectual capability to be an engineer, right? So engineers need to make sure that the building doesn't fall down or the bridge doesn't collapse.
Yeah.
What we can do is say, why are you building this? Should you build it here? Is it worth it to build it here? What are the implications of having this here? Right? It's the whole idea, you know, that you've got all these incredible biomedical researchers that, you know, can clone people, can edit genes, but then you have to have people talking about, well, what are the societal, cultural, ethical implications of all this? And a lot of times that's not taught.
And and I mean, there's none of that.
And okay, that's an obvious example, but a less obvious example is, oh, just text me the address and I'll use navigation. Well, for you know, for tens of thousands, for hundreds of thousands of years, the fact that you're here and I'm here meant that our ancestors were able to find their way home, find their food, find their way out of trouble, find their way back, right? Find new markets. That ability to find your way. For God's sake, we could lose that in less than a generation.
Absolutely. And we are.
And those are the questions that you have to ask of people.
I love it.
Do you want to lose that ability to find your way? Right? By all means, have the tools, but ask yourself, can you find your way? And not just literally, but figuratively, can you find your way?
I think that's a very important question for educators to ponder on, honestly,
And find your way.
and think about their own process. Because it's something that applies to classrooms, but it's also something that really applies to anything we do in life.
Yeah, that's how I do this. And you know, the great thing is that even though a lot of the bureaucracy behind my job is not fun, the actual being there with the students is great. You know, it's light, it's positive. You know, when I was a banker in London or in Chicago or Athens, I never got the sense of satisfaction that I have when I see a student who's a senior and was a freshman and can point to something I did that helped change their trajectory.
How wonderful.
I mean, is there any value like that? I mean, think of the potential multiplier effects. That's why we're here. We're all here to serve in one way or another.
Agree? It's the only thing that has value. It gives us, actually makes life much more pleasant. I personally Like that unbearable otherwise. I love function and usefulness, especially for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, that is, I guess that's where we're all parents, whether we are or aren't. I think that the idea that you need to plant a seed of a tree that, yeah, you may see it, you may not see it, but
It's there.
it's there. It's there. Somebody will go under the shade of that tree.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's fundamental and it's wonderful work. Wonderful work. Um, in closing, we have a couple of minutes left. Anything else? I mean, I think that's
Well, this conversation reminds me of conversations we probably both had with one of our mutual friends. We're all over the place, but we got everything. We got so much out in the conversation. The only other thing I'd tell you is I'm writing a book on Greek merchants during the 19th century, and when we're talking about asymmetry. This is a story of a group of merchants, mostly from Chios, that basically transformed the world of the first industrial revolution, and nobody knows about it.
how cool is that?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting. I think that it's interesting because they played an interesting role in the United States in the Civil War. That's part of the gambit of the Confederates was that the rest of the world needed to recognize them for cotton. Well, Greek cotton merchants were active in Egypt, were active in India, were active in the Ottoman Empire, and helped to create an alternative cotton supply chain, which may have altered that war. What it did alter, though, is the way cotton was traded. They also altered the way grain was traded. So a lot of the reason why the United States became so powerful in the grain trade is because Greek grain merchants in Odessa were sending information about the opening of the Crimean War, which would block Odessa, and gave an opportunity for American grain from the Midwest to conquer the British and French and German markets. And of course, those guys didn't just provide the information, they profited. So one of the first Greeks in New York established a grain trading company in the 1850s doing precisely that. And that's the other thing. I mean, the Greek American story is a lot older than we think. And it's a great opportunity to challenge narratives and stereotypes. I think you and I do that well. I think that we're always up against conventional wisdoms that aren't really wisdoms. They're basically belief system. And as my wife always says, belief system, what are the initials for belief systems? BS. Right? So
Yeah.
So we need to keep challenging narratives. This book challenges narratives. You challenge narratives. EMBCA challenges narratives. And at some point there's a tipping point. Some point the challenge narrative becomes conventional wisdom, which is great, but that means it's an even greater challenge because you can't sit on your laurels.
I think it's good. Keeps us on our feet.
People like you and me need to constantly be challenged.
We like that.
I'm so glad we had this conversation, this
Amazing.
chat.
Thank you.
Oh, of course.
I loved that. I loved everything, and I think there's so many wonderful.
I hope so. Well, it's a great honor to be asked to do this. You know how highly we all think of you, and I'm so glad that you're part of the directorate of EMBCA. You're a very important addition.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel the same for you. Thank you.
All right.
Happy holidays.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Bye.